Good afternoon. I'm still reporting on the economy. Right now, please like, share, and subscribe down below. Late last night in Iowa, after winning the Iowa caucuses by a record 31 percentage points, President Trump took to the stage to thank his supporters, but near the end of his speech, for the first time in over 4 years, he mentioned once again that he planned on paying down the national debt as soon as he got back into office. Unfortunately, since this statement came at the very end of a long night, almost no one heard it, and then this morning, no one on the news reported on it. Had I not accidentally caught it, it might have gone completely unnoticed, just like it did 4 years ago. 4 years ago, I think the reason Trump didn't follow through on that promise was because he came under such malicious and continuous attacks from the deep state and the desperado party that he just couldn't afford to make another set of the richest people in the United States mad at him as well, so he probably correctly decided to let that reform slide until his final 4 years. So here's the proof. Trump actually making the same promise last night.
And we did a job. We had the safest border in our history. We had the greatest economy in our history. We were a great nation 3 years ago, and now we're a nation in decline. We are going to turn it around so fast. It's going to happen so fast. We're going to drill. We're going to we have great wealth. We're going to drill. We're going to use that money to lower your taxes even further. We gave you the biggest tax cut in history. And we're going to lower them further, and we're also going to pay off national debt. It's about time. It's about time.
Now, here is my report from almost 4 years ago explaining how we could start reducing the national debt quite easily and with no damage to the economy. Good evening. I'm still reporting on the economy. Every so often someone will ask me about the economy in my comments section, and I'll take another swipe at concisely explaining the solution. The current debt money system tends to concentrate most of the nation's money into very few hands. That's why folks like Bernie complain and say they're going to soak the rich as their main political talking point. But soaking will never actually work. The rich will always have workarounds and backdoors built into whatever legislation does make it through the House of Representatives and heads to the Senate. Why? Because they have all the money, and it is a trivial matter to buy up sufficient votes to provide the hidden backdoors to protect the core of their true wealth. So what's the solution? You've got to go to the root of the matter. You've got to make the fix easy for the vast majority of voters to understand. The legislation has to be simple enough for everyone to read in a couple of minutes. This has been my main challenge in life, and I keep trying to improve on it every time I put my hand to it. We don't need the debt. We don't need to create our money by selling bonds, which is debt. The United States of America was built on the other money system, the one everyone thinks is in place right now, but it's not. Just create the money without the debt. It's so simple, the mind recoils. The only way to control the money supply is to reissue U.S. notes, United States notes from the U.S. Treasury, and have that be the only money of the United States. That way, if someone illegally creates more of it themselves, they fall under counterfeiting laws. It's the only way to do it. So the next question is, how do we make the switch from debt-laden Federal Reserve notes over to U.S. notes? First of all, U.S. notes served the United States very well for its first 150 plus years. Under the debt-free U.S. note system, there was no income tax. Income tax was seen as unconstitutional. Yet the United States became the roaring industrial giant of the world, built out of nothing but hard work of immigrants seeking to breathe free and break the chains of the European monarchies. Interestingly, during those formative years, the U.S. industrial might grew because it was protected by tariffs of as much as 40%. Tariffs were seen as a good thing. Presidential races were run on whether to increase tariffs from like 25 to 35%, for example. So having the U.S. Treasury decide how much money should be in circulation is the way to do this. Not have a bunch of unelected bankers called the Federal Reserve handle it, not have a bunch of elected Congress people who will do anything for a little extra money decide. The U.S. Treasury is under the executive branch. They need to handle this. Because guess what? If your next door neighbor was put in charge of the money supply of the United States tomorrow, who do you think would get more of it? You or him? Exactly. If the Fed is in charge of the money supply, who do you think is going to get the lion's share of the new money created? Them or us? Exactly. That's why my monetary reform motto is, it's not what backs the money, it's who controls the quantity. That's the problem. So this solution is nothing new. It's simply returning to the monetary concept that guided America to greatness in the first place, the U.S. note issued not by Congress, by the U.S. Treasury. If they issue too much money, what happens? We get inflation. If they issue too little money, what happens? We get a recession, and if they don't correct that, a depression. So how do we make the switch back to U.S. notes without upsetting the entire economic system? Easy. Right now, all our money is backed by debt. U.S. bonds, Treasury notes, and Treasury bills. The difference is how long-term the debt is. Bonds have the longest terms. But let's call them all bonds to make this a little less confusing for the time being. As the bonds come due right now, the U.S. Treasury has to repay them plus interest to the purchaser of the bonds. So the change would be, instead of repaying the bond holders with Federal Reserve notes or their electronic equivalents, we would simply pay that debt, using U.S. notes and their electronic equivalents. Why? Because the Federal Reserve notes just perpetuate the debt money system. Paying off the bonds with U.S. notes extinguishes the debt because it destroys the Federal Reserve notes upon payoff and replaces them with the same dollar value but in the debt-free United States note. That way, the big banks don't get to pay with any more Federal Reserve notes. Why? Because the U.S. government would no longer be allowed to borrow. Yes, it's just that simple. But what happens if our politicians decide we had to go to war or spend some other exorbitant extra amount on a national disaster, for example? Well, then Congress would have to announce that it was ordering the U.S. Treasury to issue additional U.S. notes into the system to meet the emergency. Yes, that would cause some inflation, but nowhere near what has been created by Brandon in the last 3 years. And besides, the Treasury Department could turn off the money spigot at the direction of the Congress any time it wanted to. They could even take back the extra amount whenever they wanted to. How? By taxation. They could collect the extra tax money or tariff money, then destroy it. Then after the extra money was destroyed, they could lower the taxes or the tariffs again by the appropriate amount. So how long would it take to completely take those wicked Federal Reserve notes and their consequent national debt out of our monetary system? Well, that only depends on the length of the bonds. The federal government has issued 30-year bonds. So if we just let those bonds ride until their natural payoff time, it would take another 30 years once the process began. However, we may be able to speed up that process and call in those 30-year bonds on an expedited schedule without harming the economy, but that would take some experimentation. But in any case, remember, every time a Federal Reserve note was extinguished by repaying the bond and its interest off, that would come off of the top of the national debt pile. And we know that over half of those bonds are in the form of relatively short-term notes. so Trump could at least pay off over half of the national debt in his next 4 years in office without doing anything to harm the economy. And that would stop inflation cold. Now back to my 4 years old explanation. Some of the U.S. bonds have a 30-year duration. However, incredibly, about 57% of our debt is in Treasury bills, that is T-bills, and they have the shortest duration of 3 years or less. Think of what this means. If Mr. Trump decided to make this change on Inauguration Day next year, he could pay off all of the T-bills with U.S. notes plus 4 years' worth of Treasury notes and 4 years' worth of Treasury bonds. My best guess is that Trump in the following 4 years could pay off between 70 and 80% of the 22 trillion plus national debt in just this way. So the 22 trillion in national debt was the 4 years old number. Look at what it is today. Just 4 years later, it's now 34 trillion and rocketing north. The good news is that the U.S. note is still legal tender. The banksters have tried to make Congress kill it off, but Congress has not done so. Therefore, the Treasury could print up all the U.S. notes that were needed starting tomorrow. Yes, we could start paying off the debt tomorrow, and the debt shown on this debt clock would start going down the very next day. So why not give it a try? Now, in the long term, Congress would have to pass a constitutional amendment, because at this time, the U.S. Constitution allows the U.S. to go into debt. But we've just shown that we don't need to go into debt. All this does is kill the American economy long term and help the banksters. So in the long term, we need this constitutional amendment to remove the ability of the federal government to borrow. Once this got going, who would have the political guts to go back to the old debt-based system once the truth was revealed? Well, of course, the Democrats would try to justify something, maybe some Republicans too, but the truth would already be out. It cures the biggest ripoff in world history. It doesn't hurt the economy. In fact, it makes all of the rest of us much, much richer. The good money system is over 150 years old. The money of that system is called the United States note instead of the Federal Reserve note. It's money without debt. This is what really made America great. I'm still reporting from just outside the citadel of American freedom. Good day.